He's already lost twice in criminal court, so why is Turkey's president so intent on another go at suing a German satirist? As a court in Hamburg hears arguments against Jan Böhmermann over his poem that romantically linked Recep Tayyip Erdogan to a goat, one wonders why the president's so ready to pick new fights abroad in a week when back home he's shut down 15 mostly pro-Kurdish media and tossed into jail 13 staff, including the editor-in-chief of the country's longest established newspaper. Sure, Cumhuriyet is critical of Erdogan, but even the wildest conspiracy theories would struggle to link the staunchly secular daily to the religious Gulenist movement accused by the government of plotting last July's failed coup. Is the crackdown about the very real attempt to overthrow Erdogan last July, or part of efforts to railroad through a constitutional reform to give the president more power? Critics argue the jailing of journalists and moderate Kurds like the co-mayors of Diyarbakir fits the pattern. But if you shut down the moderates at a time when the government's at war with the hardline PKK, what consequences, both inside Turkey and across the border in Iraq and Syria, where Turkey is fighting the same US-backed Kurdish forces that are attacking ISIS? Today in the France 24 debate, Erdogan versus, well, everyone, it seems. With us from the U.S. Capitol, Cumhuriyet's former Washington correspondent İlhan Tanir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Joining us from Ankara, Heshyar Ozoy, member of parliament for the same HDP party as those two mayors we mentioned in Diyarbakir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
From Istanbul, Yunus Paksoy, reporter for the daily Sabah newspaper, just back from the front lines of the fighting in Iraq. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And from Essen in Germany, Kader Konuk, who chairs the Turkish Studies Department at Essen University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me tonight.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. He lost in criminal court not once but twice, so Turkey's president now taking up a civil suit against the 24 verses that back in March so infuriated Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Delano de Souza has more.
Sackdoof, feige und verklemmt. Ist Erdogan der Präsident?
A defamatory poem recited with a grin on German national television. This was the moment comedian Jan Böhmermann made an enemy out of the Turkish president after he accused Erdogan of bestiality and pedophilia. His lawyer argues the poem in question is nothing but satire.
The poem cannot be evaluated on its own, but it has to be evaluated as part of the whole performance, where the question was what satire is allowed and what isn't. And it happened after Mr. Erdogan massively damaged the concept of freedom of speech in Europe and questioned where the boundaries of free speech are.
In early October, German prosecutors dropped a criminal case against Jan Böhmermann after a court ruled there was no sufficient evidence the poem constituted slander. Turkey's president is now seeking to completely ban the poem in a civil case. Erdogan's lawyer says the suit isn't about taking on artistic freedom.
There is no conflict between the two. Human dignity is inviolable. There is no trade-off. There is nothing to consider.
Böhmermann's poem unleashed a bitter row between Ankara and Berlin and came at an awkward time. This as Europe was looking for Turkey's help in stemming the migrant influx. The episode also placed the German Chancellor in an uncomfortable position after Angela Merkel allowed the criminal challenge to go ahead instead of standing up for her countrymen.
Kader Konuk, why is the Turkish president so intent on pursuing this case?
I think because it is a possibility of trying to manipulate the freedom of speech and the academic freedom in a country beyond his reach. And Turkey has Germany has seen a substantial migration from Turkey to Germany since the 1960s, since the guest workers were invited in order to support the economic efforts in Germany. And there are about more than 2 million citizens in Germany who are of Turkish descent. And so trying to control this population and trying to persuade them to support the AKP government is only possible if he is successful in intervening in the German debates about
But he knows
Turkey.
he knows he's not going to be successful. I mean, he's already lost twice in court.
I think that's not the point. It's a possibility for him to show his power beyond the limits, the boundaries of Turkey, and he's very present in a substantial part of the Turkish heritage citizens community here in Germany, and he tries with these debates to intervene and to take control over the also the voting behavior of the Turkish heritage or the Turkish citizens in Germany who are able to now vote in the Turkish elections. They've done that twice, and it's in a substantial amount of people, a good community that is able to. I'm sorry. There is the number of Turkish citizens in Germany is substantial enough for him to worry about the next election as well.
Yunus Paksoy, do you agree?
Do I agree with what? Sorry?
I'm asking Yunus Paksoy. Do you agree?
I don't think it's the case Erdogan against everyone. I think the media, the Western media especially, is trying to manipulate the people into it. It's not about Erdogan versus like everyone. Erdogan is just trying to go against those who are against him, who are harshly against him. So it's not really the case. So Jan Böhmermann case, Böhmermann read a poem, like an insulting poem, on a state-run TV channel. So if you're doing this on a state-run TV channel, it may reflect the views of the German government. And he was swearing at
But do you
Erdogan.
believe that, Yunus? Do you honestly, in your heart of
people.
hearts, believe that when Jan Böhmermann, who's a comedian and a satirist, reads that he's actually reflecting the views of the German government? Because nobody here does.
I mean, you are doing this on a state-run TV channel, and you are insulting the people of Turkey. You are insulting a president. I mean, let's say it's not about Erdogan. Let's say it's about Obama, or it's about Hollande. It doesn't matter. You're just insulting, and you are swearing at the president of another country. I think it's just not acceptable, and everyone should agree on this. But when it's about Erdogan, everyone just says
I totally
he can say that.
disagree. I disagree. It's a question of taste what Böhmermann has done, but the case has been dropped, and it's very, very important to protect the freedom of speech and criticism.
Kunur, on that point, our correspondent saying a majority of Turkish citizens in Germany voted for Erdogan, and many are offended by that poem.
That might be true, but many of the Turkish heritage, by the Turkish heritage, people here in Germany are also German citizens and are very aware of the fact that the basic principles of democracy to which the freedom of speech belongs is threatened here by the interventions of the Turkish government. We have other cases. We can talk about the parliamentarians of Turkish heritage and non-Turkish heritage who supported the recognition of the Armenian genocide through the German parliament, they have been threatened by supporters of the current regime. They have been criticized by the consulate and embassy members, and some of them have had to have protection. It is a matter for Germany to protect the freedom of speech, the academic freedom and religious freedom in this country against the spreading its support for Erdogan here.
Ilan Tanir, you're in Washington. Is this a case of a cultural quid pro quo? It's acceptable in a country like Germany. It's just simply not acceptable in other places when it comes to poking fun at the president.
It is part of the cartoonist's or satirist's job to poke and make fun of leaders and any other leaders. Just one example. A couple of weeks ago, Britain's new foreign minister, Boris Johnson, was in Ankara. Boris Johnson written far more insulting, if they call it insulting, poem about Mr. Erdogan, and he even won the prize for the most offensive poem against Mr. Erdogan in England. And Boris Johnson was in Ankara. He was hosted by President Erdogan, and he was giving a present by Mr. Erdogan. He was hosted by all the leading officials of AKP government. And when he was asked in Istanbul during the press conference, he said he was not even asked about his poem. So Mr. Erdogan picks his enemies. And as Daily Sabah's reporter said, he presents this as he's fighting against Western powers. And he's just one of the posturing that he has been so skillful to do in Turkey, that he is fighting against basically whole world, and he's defending his country, whereas satirists and journalists and academics have every right to criticize, even go further and make his statements, because this is the freedom of expression and freedom of academia, and we know that it is very little left in Turkey, especially since the coup. That just one example, Mr. Erdogan recently issued a decree now that he can appoint all of universities, rectors, including private universities, rectors, just one man. So this is just a part of the posturing, and it works in Turkey because he has enormous influence over the media, such as Daily Sabah, just one of them, but more than 90% of the Turkish press and media right now under his influence. There is only one channel left in Turkey. At the 80 million country, there is only Halk TV that can be classified as critical of the government, and go figure.
All right, before we go into the situation in Turkey itself, let me ask Heshyar Osoy just about the relationship between Turkey and Germany. And what does this case say about that relationship?
I mean, as you know, Ms. Merkel has been working on the refugee deal with the Turkish government, and they have oftentimes turned a blind eye on the kinds of human rights violations and anti-democratic practices happening in the country. And the European Union needs to work with Turkey to find a refugee crisis. But at the same time, we know that many European politicians, including German politicians, are also angry at Erdogan because of him constantly blackmailing both Europe, and of course Germany is the key leader there in that context. So, and over the Armenian issue, the genocide, there was a huge crisis there as well. And also there were problems with the Incirlik base when the government didn't let the German parliamentarians to visit the base. So the relationships, I think, are quite tense. And on top of all of these, I mean, this case with the poem, the court case about the poem is, I also agree that Erdogan is somehow manipulating the situation to mobilize the German citizens of Turkish origin, and very important also base there, not simply to get their votes for the elections in Turkey, but also to kind of be influential in German politics as well.
All right, lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. This one's sticking up for the president, saying, have you listened to the so-called poem Böhmermann read about Erdogan on TV? Do you think it's satire? Do you think it's bullying to demand justice when your dignity is attacked? Yunus Paksoy, when you think Turkey is a country that is applying for EU citizenship, a few years ago hailed as an example for the region, what do you make of that relationship right now between Berlin and Ankara?
I mean, I guess İlhan Taner just said that Erdogan is picking his enemies. It doesn't work that way. He doesn't pick his enemies. I mean, he's just sitting in Ankara and a guy in Germany on a state-run TV channel reads a poem full of insults, full of swearing, and it just turns into a case. I mean, he doesn't just pick his enemies. He reads a poem, he insults him, he swears at him, and then it turns into a case. It's not like Erdogan goes after him, goes after her, goes after that. It doesn't work that way. I mean, if you are going against Erdogan, I mean, just Western media, I mean, Germany, the US, I mean, Britain, I mean, if you're going after him, I mean, if you're directing insults at him, or if you're just smearing at him, I mean, it's just going to be everyone against Erdogan. I mean, it's just that basic.
This is not a question.
Yunus Paksoy, go ahead.
This is not a question of dignity, but it's a question of democracy.
One at a time. Yunus Paksoy.
Okay. Coming at Turkish-EU relations, I don't think just this poem case will affect Turkish-EU relations to a great extent. But what harms Turkish-EU relations is that I mean, there are always promises from Brussels. It always says, we're going to grant visa-free travel to Turkish citizens, or we are going to open more chapters. But it is always delayed.
But they don't. It's always delayed.
Travel, they said.
Just very briefly before we go to the break, Kader Konur, very briefly, because we have to go to the break.
Yes, I think this is not a question of dignity. It's not a question of taste. It's a question of democracy. And the Böhmermann case is not even that much in the German public right now. What is being debated is the refugee deal with Turkey. And the fact that Merkel has been so careful around Erdogan that no criticism against the Turkish government and the AKP regime is basically possible through official channels at the moment. And I think that is the real risk, not just this singular Böhmermann case and the question of whether this kind of satire should be allowed or not.
All right. When we come back, we're going to look at the domestic situation inside of Turkey. You're watching the France 24 debate.